This is Examples in Music for Module 32. 32.1 says, identify and label pivot chord modulations in real music examples. This third movement of a piano sonata by Mozart in D major starts in one key, and relatively early on it modulates and cadences in a new tonal area. So at the beginning of this, we have a tonal center of D major. But going from measure 5 into measure 6, 7, and 8, we can see the presence of many G sharps, and it cadences on an A chord. Now in the key of D major, we might expect that to happen because it is common to have a half cadence or something that cadences on the dominant of the original key. However, if we listen to this again, there's a little bit more finality to this cadence than what we would hear from a typical half cadence. That's partially due to this G sharp being introduced early on rather than just merely in the chord prior to the cadence point. And that feeling of finality of this chord gives support to the argument that we've done a modulation rather than a half cadence. When looking for a pivot chord in terms of our analysis, we should look prior to the G sharp being introduced. The chord here cannot be the pivot chord because G sharp is not part of the original key. So let's go to one chord prior to that over here. If we analyze these notes, we have a B, D, F sharp chord that's in first inversion with a couple of passing non-chord tones in the top voice. That B minor chord in first inversion would be a Roman numeral 6 chord in the original key of D major. It would also be analyzed as a Roman numeral 2 chord in the key of A major. So this is our pivot chord here. Roman numeral 6 in the key of D and Roman numeral 2 in the key of A. If we make note that we're modulating to the key of A starting here, then this in the key of A becomes a 5-7 chord, eventually taking us to a 2 chord, a cadential 6-4, and then a Roman numeral 1 in the key of A. .2 says, define direct modulation, identify and label direct modulations in real music examples. In this opening of a Bach chorale, we have an example of a direct modulation. Direct modulations are sometimes called phrase modulations, because in this case we have two phrases that are separate from one another and they're in two entirely different keys, and they're not really connected by use of pivot chord. The opening phrase here is in F major, cadencing at this fermata from a 5 chord to a 1 chord. Following the fermata, we have a new phrase, now with C sharps, which are not typically part of an F major key, and this phrase ends up cadencing on a D minor chord, preceded by an A major chord, the 5 of D minor. So what we see is two separate phrases, one after another. The first in the key of F major, the second in the key of D minor, and we call this a direct modulation. Objective 32.3 says, identify and label modulations introduced by secondary chords in real music examples. Here's the opening of the Clementi Sonatina in C major. If we analyze the beginning of this excerpt from here up until the cadence point here, ignoring the scalar figure that goes on, we will see and hear an excerpt that starts out in C major and then cadences after it modulates to G major. In measure 6, we're introduced with an F sharp, which is not of the key of C major. The chord that follows on the downbeat of this measure is a G, B, D chord, or a G chord. G is the dominant of C major, the original key, and F sharp is G's leading tone. If we analyze this chord, we have an F sharp, a C, and an E. This gives us enough information to analyze it as an F sharp A, C, E chord, a 7th chord, in fact, a half diminished 7th chord, that happens to have an omission of the 3rd, the note A. In the key of C major, this would be analyzed as a secondary chord, a secondary leading tone chord of 5. So one way of analyzing this would be the secondary leading tone chord of 5 going to 5 of the original key, C. At the same time, we could analyze this as the starting point of the modulation being introduced by the secondary chord. So if we label this as being in G major here, then we have a leading tone chord going to a 1 chord, followed by, in the key of G major, a 2 chord in first inversion, then a cadential 6/4 moving to G, the 1 chord. And when we listen to this from the beginning to here, at the cadence point on this measure, it sounds like this is a final cadence point rather than a half cadence of the original key.